If you grew up poor in the 1980s, your childhood didn't look like the movies. There were no big houses, no overflowing toy chests, no endless choices. Life was simpler, harder, quieter in some ways, and louder in others. You learned early that money mattered, even if no one explained why. You just felt it in the pauses, in the sighs, in the way adults spoke behind closed doors. You remember homes that were small, but crowded, where space was shared and privacy was rare. Bedrooms were often shared, sometimes with siblings, sometimes with cousins, sometimes with whoever needed a place to sleep that night. You learned to fall asleep through noise, through TVs playing late into the night, through arguments, through laughter, through life happening all around you. If you grew up poor, you remember furniture that stayed the same for years. Sofas with worn arms, coffee tables with chipped corners, dining chairs that wobbled just a little. Nothing matched, but everything worked. And when something broke, it wasn't replaced, it was fixed, taped, nailed, or simply lived with. You remember food that filled you up, even if it wasn't exciting. Meals were built around what was cheap, what lasted, what could stretch. Beans, rice, potatoes, pasta, hot dogs, canned vegetables, day-old bread. Meat was sometimes the star, sometimes the flavoring. You learned that leftovers weren't a backup plan, they were tomorrow. You remember being told to clean your plate, not because of manners, but because wasting food was unthinkable. Someone worked hard for that meal. Someone went without so you could eat. And even if you didn't fully understand it yet, you respected it. If you grew up poor in the 1980s, you remember clothes that told a story. Hand-me-downs that came from older siblings, neighbors, church donations, or relatives. Clothes that had already lived another life before they reached you. You didn't always like them, but you wore them anyway. Because clothes weren't about expression, they were about necessity. You remember shoes being worn until they couldn't be worn anymore. Soles thinning, heels leaning, sides tearing, sometimes patched, sometimes glued, sometimes held together by sheer hope. New shoes weren't expected, they were earned, waited for, or prayed for. You remember school being both an escape and a reminder. An escape from home stress, and a reminder of what you didn't have. You noticed who had brand name clothes, who brought lunch money every day, who had the newest backpack. You learned how to blend in, how to stay quiet, how not to draw attention. If you grew up poor, you remember the quiet embarrassment of free or reduced lunch, the way names were called, the different colored tickets, the subtle ways kids could tell. You learned not to talk about it. You learned to pretend it didn't matter. But it did. You remember teachers who cared, and teachers who didn't notice. You remember hoping school supplies would last all year. You remember sharpening pencils down to nothing, saving notebook pages, erasing until paper tore thin. You learned to make things last. If you grew up poor in the 1980s, you remember boredom. Real boredom. Long afternoons, with nothing planned, and nowhere to go. No phones, no internet. Sometimes not even cable TV. You made your own entertainment. You played outside until the streetlights came on. You invented games. You used imagination like a survival skill. You remember summers that felt endless. Hot days, sticky nights, Bucks fans, pushing warm air around the room. Windows open, screens rattling. You remember sleeping lightly, listening to sounds outside, feeling both restless and strangely safe. You remember parents who worked constantly, sometimes 2 jobs, sometimes night shifts, sometimes jobs they hated. You remember exhaustion being normal. You remember adults worrying without saying much. Bills were paid late, notices came in the mail. Conversations stopped when kids walked in. If you grew up poor, you remember learning to read the room. You learned when to ask for things and when not to. You learned when money was tight, just by the tone of a voice, the tension in a sigh, the way a wallet was closed a little too slowly. You remember utilities being turned off, or almost turned off, lights flickering, heat being rationed, hot water running out. You learned to adapt. You learned to be grateful for what was on, not angry about what wasn't. You remember holidays being uncertain. Some years were magical. Some years were quiet. Christmas gifts were wrapped carefully. sometimes reused paper, sometimes bags saved from previous years. Gifts weren't about quantity, they were about effort. If you grew up poor, you remember learning gratitude early. Not because someone told you to, but because you saw sacrifice. You saw parents go without. You saw them choose you over themselves again and again. You remember birthdays that were small but sincere. Homemade cakes. One or two presents. Candles blown out with real wishes. Wishes that weren't about toys but about stability, peace, and things you didn't yet have words for. If you grew up poor in the 1980s, you remember a community. Neighbors who helped each other. Kids who shared bikes, toys, snacks. People who watched each other's children. There wasn't much, but what there was shared. You remember being tough. Not because you wanted to be, but because you had to be. You fell down, got back up, and kept going. Complaining didn't change things. Crying didn't fix them. So you learned resilience before you learned the word. You remember carrying those lessons into adulthood. Even now, you struggle to throw things away. You save food, you turn off lights. You worry about money even when you have enough, because growing up poor never really leaves you. And yet, if you're honest, you also remember the strength it gave you, the creativity, the empathy, the ability to survive hard times. You learned how to live with less and how to appreciate more.